Assalamu alaikum, Bismillahir and welcome to the Harvard Islamic Study Circle, HISC Seerah session 213. Inshallah, we'll continue with stories from the Prophetic Household. We did some of the wives, stories relating to the wives of the Prophet, and we'll continue with that this week and perhaps even into next week, inshallah. A quick recap from last week. We discussed the wives of the Prophet. Obviously, we'll just run through the names of the wives and the Prophet and his children and grandchildren. And so we have obviously his first wife, Khadija binti Khuwaylid, obviously that marriage started before prophethood and obviously into prophethood, and then through Khadija, the Prophet had 7 children. 4 of them survived into adulthood, and they were Zainab, Ruqayya, Kulthum, and Fatima. Obviously, he had a son called Qasim, who passed away when Qasim was, probably 7 or 8, and one of the Prophet's kunya was Abu Qasim. And so his children, Zainab, she married Abu al-As bin Rabi. Ruqayya married Uthman ibn Affan, and then she passed away after the Battle of Badr, or during the period of the Battle of Badr. Then Prophet married his other daughter, Kulthum, to Uthman ibn Affan after that, and then she also passed away. And then the other daughter, Fatima, the one who gave Prophet some grandchildren, she married Ali ibn Abi Talib, and their kids were, obviously everyone knows, Hassan and Hussein, and then Zainab and Kulthum. And again, that was as a recognition from Fatima of her other sisters. The other wives of the Prophet after Khadija passed away included Sauda bint Zaman, Aisha bint Abu Bakr, Hafsa bint Umer bin al-Khattab, whose first husband was Khunais bin Hudhaifa. Then there's Zainab bint Khuzaymah, who was from Bani Hilal, and she was nicknamed Masakin, but she died a few months after the marriage of the Prophet. Then there's Salama Hind bint Abi Umayyah, who was formerly married to Abu Salama. Then there was Zainab bint Jash from Bani Asad, who married Zayd bin Haritha, who was previously the adoptive son of the Prophet. They divorced, and then the Prophet was instructed to marry Zainab bint Jash by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then we had Juwayriya bint al-Harith, daughter of one of the chieftains of Bani al-Mustalik, who was set free after captivity, and the Prophet married Juwayriya, and then the whole tribe became Muslim. And then there's Habiba, also known as Ramla, daughter of Abu Sufyan, who had previously married Ubaidullah bin Jash, who became a Christian whilst they were in Abyssinia. And then Habiba was married in absentia to the Prophet by the Najashi. We also previously talked about the story of Safiya binti Huyay ibn Akhtab, the daughter of the chief of the Jewish tribe of Banu Nadir. And then there was Rehana binti Zayd, another freed captive from Banu Qurayza, and also Maymuna bint al-Harith, the sister of Fadl. And the Prophet married Maymuna after the compensatory Umrah. And then we also briefly mentioned the story of Maria the Copt al-Qibtiyah, who was gifted to the Prophet by the Muqawqis, who was the vice regent or the governor of Egypt on behalf of the Roman or the Byzantine Empire. and inshallah we'll do more about Maria later on, maybe today, if not next week, inshallah. And one of the references we talked about last time was Allah had revealed Surah Tahreem regarding an incident where when Hafsa found Maria leaving her house on her day, and then she confronted Prophet and then they had an argument, and Hafsa extracted a promise from the Prophet that he would never see Maria again, and the Prophet told Hafsa not to tell Aisha, but she went straight away and told Aisha. And then the Prophet confronted Hafsa, and then Hafsa said, well, who told you? And then the Prophet said this has been revealed to him by Allah. And so that was the story, which we'll briefly touch upon again today, inshallah. And then we've previously alluded to the fact that Prophet ﷺ had separated from his wives for nearly for a whole month, 29 days, and inshallah we'll go into that in a bit more detail today, inshallah. But we talked about at the end of the last session how the prelude to that was that once Jibreel came down to Prophet ﷺ with another angel who was given permission for the first time to come down to earth, and essentially the Prophet ﷺ was offered the choice to either be a king prophet or to be a slave Rasul, an Abd Rasul. And the Prophet ﷺ chose to be a slave Rasul, which essentially meant that from that point forward, he lived a very Spartan and frugal lifestyle. Nothing lavish, nothing extravagant, and he made sure that that was the norm for him, and obviously for his household, which includes his wives. But as the Muslims conquered more territory, got more allegiances, collected more in terms of taxation and jizya, a lot more wealth came flooding into Medina, which was obviously the capital of the Islamic State, and the lifestyle of many of the Sahabi, which had hitherto been quite sort of difficult, they saw a lot more luxuries. They saw a lot more extravagance, not the huge extravagance that we see maybe 2, 3, 5 decades later during the time of Banu Umayyah, when there was extreme wealth flooding into the Muslims. But there's still a lot more wealth. So the Sahabi and their wives lifestyle was improving. So the Prophet's wives naturally said, well, why can't we have a better lifestyle? So that was the sort of background to that, and they sort of collectively ganged up on the Prophet, and they as a group demanded or asked for more better quality lifestyle, better quality living, some perhaps things like more slaves or cleaners or helpers, as well as some more plates and foodstuffs, etc. And the Prophet was quite taken aback when he found all of his wives asking for this, which was within their right, but the Prophet had made clear to them previously that that's not what he was about. So we know about this story because of a famous hadith that Ibn Abbas relates, or the incident Ibn Abbas relates, and this is found in Sahih Muslim, and it's basically Ibn Abbas, the son of Abbas. He says that for a whole year I desired to ask the Khalif Umar ibn al-Khattab a question regarding the explanation of the verses of Surah Tahreem, which we talked about last week. So for a whole year, because Ibn Abbas, he's well known for his understanding of the Qur'an, so he would ask these questions regarding the tafsir or the isbab al-nasul, the purpose of revelation for some of the verses, so he could understand the Qur'an better. Because obviously he was too young when many of the verses were revealed, and his father only came to Medina just before the conquest of Mecca. So he's walking around, waiting, biding his time, so he can ask Umar ibn al-Khattab for the explanation of these verses. And he says in this hadith, I could not ask him because I respected Umar too much. Then he says, when we went to perform Hajj, I too went along with him. And then as we're returning from the Hajj, we were still on our way home when Umar went aside to answer the call of nature by one of the aback trees. And then he says, I waited there until he finished, and then I proceeded with him, and then I asked him, O Amir al-Mu'mineen, who were the two wives of the Prophet who aided one another against him, against the Prophet? So straight away, Umar, without any hesitation, he says they were Hafsa and Aisha, and again, this is his own daughter he's talking about. So it could be quite painful for him to mention that that his own daughters being indirectly or directly criticized by Allah in the Qur'an, and we read about this in Surah Tahreem. And so he goes, these were Hafsa and Aisha. And then Ibn Abbas says, by Allah, I wanted to ask you this for about a year, but I could not do so owing to the fact that I respect you so much. Then Umar replied, please don't refrain from asking me. If you think that I have knowledge about a certain matter, then you need to ask me. And if I know about it, then I will tell you. So again, Umar, he's doing this for the wider wisdom, for our benefit. Obviously, he knows this. So then, he mentions that it was Hafsa and Aisha, but then he goes on to explain, and shall I tell you something extra? Right? So he goes on and not just answers that question, he then goes and explains the whole situation. And so he talks about what we did last week. So he mentions about how Hafsa had found Maria leaving her house, and the whole argument and the discussion, and then her going to Aisha, and then the surah was revealed. So he then gave the whole incident, the context behind Surah Tahreem, which we know today. And again, Allah could have put a veil over this, right? And Allah could have protected us from, knowing the inner workings of the what happens in the Prophet's household. But obviously, by mentioning it in the Qur'an, he's giving us that there is so much learning for us, even from an incident like this. And again, so Umar, in that context, he's explaining this for the benefit of us, that even though this is a potentially sensitive topic, it's mentioned in the Qur'an, so we have the permission to discuss it. Otherwise, we wouldn't normally discuss private matters, especially private matters that happen in the household of the Prophet ﷺ. But obviously, in Allah's wisdom, he's referred to it directly. And again, we talked about how all the wives were given that option, and we'll talk about that a bit later on today. So things were made quite clear that the Prophet ﷺ is not somebody that that they can sort of treat like that. And then Umar then goes on to explain how other aspects of his daughter Hafsa and her relationship with the Prophet ﷺ. And again, in another hadith in Sahih Bukhari, it's mentioned that Hafsa had a bit of a short temper. And again, you have to realize Hafsa grew up in the household of Umar ibn al-Khattab, and we know the type of character Umar is. So, on this occasion, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. So she had some characteristics which which was similar to her father, and again, it's mentioned in Bukhari that sometimes she would have a bit of a temper, and sometimes she would even answer the Prophet ﷺ back. And then once, when Umar found out that she used to do this, he went immediately to her and said, I've heard that you talk to the noble Prophet as if you were on an equal footing with him. Is that true? And Hafsa replied, of course I do. Then Umar said, look, my daughter, I warn you of Allah's punishment. Do not compete with Aisha, who is proud of her beauty due to the Prophet's love for her. He said, look, there's everyone knows that the score there. Don't try to get to do this one-upmanship. And so, he said, if you ever have a problem, come to me. Don't go to the Prophet ﷺ. Don't burden him with issues. Come to me and I will sort issues out. If you ever need anything, don't go to the Prophet ﷺ. Come to me. And again, we previously mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ had in fact given Hafsa one divorce. So he did actually divorce Hafsa, not the full 3 divorces, but he gave her one divorce. But then Jibreel came to the Prophet ﷺ, and Jibreel told the Prophet ﷺ to take her back because she, keeps her fasts and she observes her prayers, especially in the last part of the nights, and that she will be his wife, the Prophet ﷺ's wife, in Jannah. So even though the Prophet ﷺ, he had a falling out with Hafsa, he gave her one divorce. Jibreel, obviously instructed by Allah, told the Prophet ﷺ to take her back, and so the Prophet ﷺ took her back. And the reason for taking her back is not because there was an incompatibility. The reason is that she's a good Muslim, right? And she keeps her fast and she prays at night, and she has this strong sense of iman, and she will be your wife in paradise. So again, that's really important for us, our generation, our children's generation, to recognize that when we do get married, we need to look at the global picture. It's not just about the here and now. It's about planning for paradise. It's about planning for the hereafter and choosing the right spouse who will maximize your chances of getting to paradise and maximize your level in paradise. So these should be some of the important decisions when it comes to choosing a spouse on both sides. So Ibn Abbas, he carries on with the story from Umar. So Umar's explaining how this was Hafsa and Aisha, and goes through the story of Maria, and then he says. He goes on to talk about another incident without Ibn Abbas prompting him. But again, it's giving us wider context, and there's so much benefit in this. And then Umar says, we were a people from the Quraysh, right, who used to dominate over our women. And this is a statement of fact, that this is the societal norms in Mecca for generations, that the men would dominate over their women. And so they would, boss them around, they would shout at them or chastise them, and their women would have to take it, because that is sort of the accepted normative behavior of people in Mecca, and that's what they used to do. And then Umar says, then we came to Medina, and we found that the people of Medina were a group where the women would dominate over them. So the social norms the expectations were completely reversed. And he goes, we moved from Mecca to Medina, and our women learned from the women of the Ansar how to dominate the men. I had a house situated in Awari. This is almost saying I had a house situated in Awari, which is one of the areas sort of on the outskirts of sort of more of a suburban part of Medina at the time. And Awari was actually also the place where Maria, the Copt, had her house, because the Prophet didn't want her to live close to the masjid because of the jealousy of the wives. So he gave her a house in Awari. And again, that's part of the reason why she came from Awari to Hafsa's house, because it's in downtown essentially. So Umar says, I had and again, Ali, this is one of the areas where Ali ibn Abi Talib used to live. So Umar says, I had a house situated in Awari where one of my wives lived there. One day I became angry with my wife and I said something. So he's, chastising her. And I said something, and then she responded back. So I rebuked her. How dare you? And then she said to me, you are rebuking me for responding back. Don't you know that the wives of the Prophet respond back to him? And this completely blows his mind, right? And then his wife, not the mother of Hafsa, but one of his wives, says, you're rebuking me for responding back. Don't you know that the wives of the Prophet respond back to him? So much so that sometimes the wives, they abandon him in anger, even if it is for the whole day. So they get the day with the Prophet, but they get so angry with him that they blank him. They blank him for the whole day. And this is completely mind-blowing for Umar, because he's grown up in Mecca, and this is not acceptable behavior. And so he's just completely shocked by this, and how, especially the women folk in their chattering classes, how they get together and they learn these things, and these sort of how they upskill in controlling their men folk. And again, this it shows how even though the normative values have changed, even the Prophet ﷺ, he's abiding with this new reality. He's not challenging it. He's not talking down on the fact that the ladies are doing things differently. And obviously he knows that things have changed. So he himself is tolerating this, and he himself is making this acceptable. And again, the other really fascinating thing is that this is common knowledge in Medina. So how the wives of the Prophet ﷺ treat the Prophet ﷺ, this is common knowledge amongst all the other wives in Medina. So you've got the wife of Umar, schooling Umar about how the wives of the Prophet ﷺ treat the Prophet ﷺ. So again, you can see how the social networking systems are there. They with their own sort of hashtags and viral memes, they've got the message across how the Prophet ﷺ is treated by his wives. And if he's treated by his wives like this, and he tolerates it, this emboldens the other wives. So Umar, he's shocked by this. And then he explains to Ibn Abbas, so I went immediately to Hafsa, his daughter, the wife of the Prophet ﷺ, and asked her, do you ever reply back to the Prophet ﷺ? And she goes, yeah. And so I said, do you ever leave him for the day? And she goes, yeah. And you get a sense of how confident she is in this, and how she's now making it normal, right? So Umar, he tells his daughter off and says, are you a fool? Whoever does this has lost everything, because this is completely unacceptable to Umar. I mean, if it was anyone else who treated the Prophet ﷺ like this, replying back to him, answering him back, blanking him like that, that's verging on the edge of kufr, right, of disbelief. And so this is completely unacceptable behavior. But obviously it's permitted within the household system. But Umar, he's just completely blown by this and goes, "Are you a fool? Whoever does this has lost everything." So he's getting really worked up at Hafsa because, again, this just goes against his paradigm. And then he says to Hafsa, "Aren't you scared of the anger of Allah upon you if the messenger is angry with you?" So he's trying to turn it a bit and put the screws on Hafsa, right? And then he tells her, never reply back to the Prophet ﷺ. Never ask him for any of your needs. If you need anything, come to me as your father, and don't irritate him for anything like this or anything trivial. And let not the status of your companion deceive you about your own status. So who's he referring to there? No. Let not the status of your companion, your BFF, deceive you about your own status. Aisha, right? So look, she can get away with things. You're not like Aisha. You can't get away with those things. So don't try and compete with her on this. You're never going to win. So he's trying to reinforce that message that, look, you need anything, come to me. Don't make the Prophet angry. Don't get irritated with him. And then he says, don't make qiyas upon Aisha for what she does, for indeed she is more graceful and dearer to the Prophet than you are. So again, he's reinforcing that, and it's common knowledge that Aisha is the dearest to the Prophet ﷺ. So and this is Umar counseling his own daughter about this. Again, he's doing it with the best intentions. So that's that part of the story. And then Umar continues. This is the same hadith, Ibn Abbas. And then Umar continues, says, "I used to have a companion from the Ansar, and we would take turns to accompany the Prophet." So they have to do they have to earn their living, and they have to spend time with the Prophet. So they would alternate. So his companion from the Ansar would work one day, and Umar would be with the Prophet, and then they'd swap over. So that's that was how they lived. They still needed to feed their family, etc., etc. And then he goes, during this time when we were discussing the Ghazanids and how they might attack, and we talked about this just before the Battle of Tabuk, that during the time when we were discussing the Ghazanids and how they might attack, he said, one day after Isha, I went to sleep, and then my neighbor, this Ansari, he came knocking on my door. So, Umar, this is in the middle of the night. So Umar's really shocked. When we say middle of the night, it's just, we recognize that they prayed Isha. And again, they haven't got electricity. They have a very different lifestyle there. They pray Isha. They go to sleep after Isha. And then they wake up in the last third of the night, do the Tahajjud, Fajr, and then the day starts. So, so he went to sleep. Neighbor came knocking on his door, all really agitated. And Umar rushes out and says, "What's the matter? What's the matter? Have the Ghassanids attacked?" And so his neighbor says, No. Something worse than that. The Prophet ﷺ has divorced his wives, right? Again, you can see how the people, they would see, if the Prophet ﷺ is stressed out by something, is causing him this psychological trauma, is making the Prophet ﷺ upset, it makes them more upset than an existential threat of a foreign army attacking, right? So that's how much that they were all shaken up by this. So something much worse, the Prophet has divorced all his wives. So then Umar, he said that as soon as Fajr was prayed, he got dressed and he rushed to the house of the Prophet ﷺ, right? It said that, he found all the people were gathered in the masjid, right? So everyone's in a state of shock, because the news is spread, the Prophet has divorced all his wives. So everyone's in a state of shock. Everyone's in the masjid, right? So, the rumours are all there. So Umar says, so then I went to Aisha, so again, Aisha's house is, adjoining the masjid of the Prophet, he then, asks her the question, probably from behind sort of the curtain, says, "Oh, daughter of Abu Bakr, have you gone to the extreme of troubling the Prophet?" So she then tells Umar off, because she's very quick-witted as well. So she replies in the same way. So Umar says, "O daughter of Abu Bakr." She goes, "O son of Khattab," Umar ibn al-Khattab, "O son of Khattab, go and take care of your own vessel," meaning Hafsa. Why are you getting upset at me? You need to take care of your own daughter. So Umar, he realizes that Hafsa is also a guilty party in this, and then he rushes to Hafsa's house and he finds her crying. So Umar asks her, "Has the Prophet divorced you all?" And Hafsa, she's weeping and she says, "I don't know. However, he has left us and he's gone to live in there was a sort of special sort of mezzanine floor in the Prophet's mosque, where he is like his private chambers, And so she's saying, I don't know, he's left us and he's gone to his sort of special sort of ante-chamber. So they're in a state of shock as well, and not knowing what the situation is. So they can't clarify the rumors. So it appears that the Prophet has left all his wives and gone to this sort of mezzanine antechamber. So then Umar, he's having another go at his daughter Hafsa, and he said, like, "Didn't I tell you this would happen? Didn't I tell you not to answer back to him?" And then she replies back, says, "You know that Allah." He then reinforces that by saying, don't you know that Allah's messenger does not love you, and were it not for the fact that I am your father, he would have divorced you before. And so she breaks down and cries even more, and she's understandably breaks down and she cries a lot more. So then he's asked her, "Well, where is the Prophet?" And she goes, "Well, he's in his antechamber, in his mezzanine room." So Umar, he goes to the mosque, and he goes towards that sort of special ante room. The process of private chambers. You had to access it by climbing up a little ladder. So again, it's like a mezzanine floor, and the Prophet would sometimes use that as a place to get away from things, for his privacy, for his sleep, for just contemplation, and just for some private time. It's like a little man cave, perhaps. So Umar, he says he went to that room and he found one of the servants of the Prophet there. So he said, "Can you ask permission from the Prophet if I can enter?" And so the servant goes in, and then he comes back out, and he said, "Look, I mentioned that you're outside, but the Prophet didn't respond." And so Umar, he goes back, sits on the minbar, gets agitated again, then goes back and says, "Ask him, that I want to see him. Can I enter?" Same response, nothing. And so he goes back, and then he gets more agitated. He comes back a third time, and that's the sunnah. You can do it up to 3 times. And on the third time, he's waiting outside, and so he says loudly, so the Prophet can hear, "Go ask permission, for I think the Prophet is thinking that I am coming for the sake of Hafsa. No, wallahi, that is not the case. For if Allah's messenger told me to execute Hafsa, I would follow that command, right? So he's basically saying that I'm not there as the sort of father-in-law. I'm coming as a friend. I'm not here to take Hafsa's side in the matter. I'm just coming to ask. So, and then it said that he was given permission to enter the room. So Umar, he goes into this sort of little ante-chamber. So Umar, he enters into it. He looks around and he's sort of astounded by how particularly sparse it is. And he says, and this is the same hadith, I only found in it some barley, wheat, a chamber pot, and I began to cry, looking at how empty the room was. And the Prophet was laying down on a fibrous mat, made out of branches of a date palm, like a jetbite. And so when the Prophet got up to turn to see him, Umar said, I can see the marks that the fiber of the date palm had made on his back. So again, and I guess this is a very famous hadith where he said, I can see the imprint of his, doesn't even have a soft mattress. So Umar said, Ya Rasulullah, have you divorced your wives? And the Prophet says, no, I haven't. And so the Prophet, so when Umar hears the good news, he goes, Allahu Akbar, right? And again, it's a reminder for us that if we hear good news, we should instantaneously say, Allahu Akbar. It should be on the tip of our tongues as a good habit for us. So he knows it's not that serious. So then Umar, he's trying to lighten the mood a bit, right? So he knows that the wives aren't divorced. This is coming straight from the Prophet ﷺ. So he's trying to lighten the mood and he's trying to cheer up the Prophet ﷺ. So then he changes the topic to trying to get a different reaction from the Prophet. So he goes, Ya Rasulullah, don't you remember that the people of Quraysh, how we used to dominate over our women? Those were the good old days. But we came to Medina and we found the opposite, and our women have learned from their women. And then he explains exactly what we just said. One day I became angry with my wife, and lo and behold, she replied back to me. And I didn't approve of that, but she told me, who are you not to approve when the wives of the Prophet reply back to him? So I went to Hafsa and told her, be careful, don't reply back to the Prophet ﷺ. And then he goes on to say, then she said, this, and I said that, and she said this, and then I said, don't be deceived by the status of Aisha. So he's going through the whole thing, the whole, story that we've just had. He's repeating that, almost word for word to the Prophet ﷺ. So when he's saying all of that, especially when he said, don't be deceived by the status of Aisha, then he sees the Prophet ﷺ smile, right? So his sort of tension's gone a bit. So his strategy is working, right? And again, so it's like bringing some humor into the situation. And he's again, they're talking about the wives, their wives, his wives, and it's sort of a man-to-man sort of bonding type discussion. So and no doubt when we can see when the women of the wives get together, they obviously talk about their husbands as well. So things don't change then and through to now perhaps. So when Umar sees the Prophet sort of smiling and engaging more, he says, may I sit down and have a conversation? So all this time he's saying all this stuff and he's standing up, and so the Prophet says, yes, fine, and he gives him permission to sit down, and then he says, O Prophet, if you have any trouble with any of your wives and you want to divorce them, know that Allah, His angels, Jibreel, Mikhail, and I, and Abu Bakr, and all the believers are with you, right? And he's basically saying, look, if you want to divorce your wives, that's fine. we back you. We're on your side, and we'll accept it, right? And again, and in another version, it said that I would always hope that Allah would back me up in things that I would say to the Prophet ﷺ. And this is exactly what was revealed in Surah Tahreem verse 4, where Allah says, if you two wives repent to Allah, it is best, for your hearts have deviated. And if you cooperate against him, then indeed Allah is his protector, and Jibreel, and the righteous believers, and the angels, moreover, are his assistants. So again, this is validation Umar is seeing for Allah using his phrases as a way of validating the feelings of the Prophet ﷺ and reinforcing the status of the Prophet ﷺ, right? And again, this is sending a message out to all his wives. Don't treat him like an ordinary human being. He's a human being, but he has a special status. So don't mess around with him like you may be tempted to mess around with if you were one of the ordinary wives of some of the other Sahabi in Medina. He's not at that level. So then Umar says, I sat down and lifted up my head to see what else was in the room, and by Allah, I could only see a few animal hides in the room, and there was nothing else. So I said to the Prophet, why don't you make dua dua to Allah that we have wealth, as he has given wealth to Persia and to Rome and the Khisra and the Caesar, even though that they don't worship Allah, he has blessed them with wealth. And then Umar began to cry. And the Prophet said, well, why are you crying? Umar said, look, why shouldn't I cry when the mat that you're sleeping on has left a mark on your back, and you are the messenger of Allah? And compare this to the Caesar and to the Khisra. You are the Mustafa, the Habib, you are the chosen one, you are the Prophet, and you are living like this when they are living like that. And it's a natural comparison to make. But when the Prophet ﷺ heard this, he got up from the mat as if he's angry, and he says, oh son of Khattab, do you have any doubts? Aren't you happy that Allah has chosen us over them for the next world, and he's given them this world? Right? Basically saying, look, they've been given good in this world, so they will have nothing in the next life. So Umar says, oh Allah, ask Allah to forgive me. Ask Allah to forgive me, he says to the Prophet. So that's sort of that's the sort of the long narration that Ibn Abbas says, where Prophet where Umar is giving sort of a greater explanation of some of the inner workings of the prophetic household. But then we know from this that the Prophet, he hadn't divorced his wives. What he'd said is he'd taken an oath to Allah that he wouldn't come close to his wives for a month. So it's not a divorce, it's a cooling off period, right? It's giving him time to reflect, it's giving them time to reflect. And again, the other thing we learn from this there is if there is a dispute, it's the husband who leaves the house. It's not the husband who kicks the wife out of the house. So he's left and he's gone to his man cave, and he's giving sort of time, separation time for each party to think about things. So he's taken an oath not to come close to his wives for a month. And it said that, after on the 29th day, Urwa says that Aisha said, "O Prophet, you've taken an oath to stay away from a month, and it's only been 29 days. So on the 29th day, he comes to Aisha, and she's trying to say, maybe you've miscounted. It's only 29 days, and you were given an oath to Allah for a month. So the Prophet says the month can be 29 days as well as 30 days, and we know this whenever it comes to Ramadan, or Shaban, it can be 30 days. So he said, look, a month can be 29 days as well. So I'm choosing the 29 days of the month, right? And again, this is Aisha just being overly protective of the Prophet, making sure that he's not committing a sin as she would see it. There's another version which says that after staying away for a month, the first house that he went to was Aisha's, and she said to him, and he said to her, Aisha, I'm going to talk to you about a very important matter. Don't be hasty in this decision, and go and consult with your parents before you come back to me. And she goes, well, what's the matter, Ya Rasulullah? And the Prophet then recited a couple of verses from Surah Al-Ahzab, chapter 33, verse 28-29. O Prophet, say to your wives, if you desire the worldly life and all its adornment, then come, I will provide for you and give you a gracious release. But if you desire Allah and His Messenger and a home of the hereafter, then indeed Allah has prepared for you, the doers of good among you, a great reward. So basically what he's saying is, the month is finished, so now I'm giving you the options, right? You can, if you want, because the whole thing came about because the wives wanted more luxuries, more goods, more material wealth in their lives. So he's basically giving them a choice. If you want that, fair enough, I'll give it to you, and then I'll give you a gracious release. It's basically, we will have an amicable divorce. You can have whatever you want in this world, and that's it. End of the matter. But if you stick to your lifestyle now, but this was the deal when you got married, then Allah's going to prepare for you, a great reward in the hereafter. And then it's basically like I say, an amicable divorce, and they can get on with their lives. And what the wives were asking for, there was nothing haram in what they were asking for it, but again, the Prophet ﷺ had already made clear to them that's not who he is, that's not his lifestyle, that's not what is expected from him, because he's thinking if he starts to, part of the calculus may have been, if he starts to live the luxurious life, that sends the wrong message for the ummah as well, right? And the Prophet ﷺ, and Aisha said, look, she felt that because he said to her, don't be hasty, think about it, ask your mother and father. He knows that when Aisha goes to ask Abu Bakr and her mother, they will talk her out of it, right? She says that he told me to consult my parents because he knew my parents would never let me leave, right? So she's assuming that he secretly wants her to say yes. So he's this is a coded way of him saying, stay with me because I want you to stay with me. So she responds, so she doesn't consult with her parents. She goes, what is there to consult, Ya Rasulullah? I have chosen Allah, His Messenger, and the Akhirah, right? And so she decided there and then. Aisha then says to the Prophet, O Prophet, don't tell your other wives that I have chosen you, right? So she said, look, I've made this decision. Don't tell the others this because they might, out of jealousy, choose the same thing. So the Prophet then says, look, Allah has sent me as a conveyor and not as someone who cuts off or is harsh. Yeah, that's not me. I'm open, and I will, it's not her position to ask the Prophet of this. This is just going transgressing a little bit, going about, going over the line a little bit. Obviously, so when the Prophet, he gave this same condition to all of them, or the same ultimatum to all of them, they all chose the wife. They all chose to remain married, and none of them even thought about leaving the Prophet, right? And that's what we expect from sort of the wives of the Prophet, the mothers of us. So again, so this is the story around that. And again, we'll go into some of the fiqh learning that we can learn from this, some of the Sharia things about divorce, and how this particular type of divorce is a permissible divorce, where the husband gives the right of divorce to the wife. And so if she's demanding divorce, he can say to her, fine, I'll give you up to, I'll give you a period of time. And some say it's up to sort of 3 or 4 months, that you can decide on the divorce. And if you want the divorce, I will divorce you. So the decision to divorce is normally with the man, but the decision on this occasion, he says, I will give that ability to you. If you keep asking the divorce, fine. If you want it, I'll let you have it. You decide, and then I will agree to it. But again, we'll talk about some of these other matters when perhaps next week when we do some of the learning from these things. So I'll finish there, inshallah. Next week we'll go more into the story of Maria, the Coptic Christian, the birth of Ibrahim, the death of Ibrahim, the solar eclipse, and then we'll sort of tie off some of these other issues around the household, inshallah. So do remember us in your du'as, and again, do look at some of these stories and the things that we can learn from these. Do make, as I say, dua for us and the ummah, and hope everyone's preparations for Ramadan are going really well. Only less than a couple of weeks away, inshallah. So, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. جزاك الله خير. السلام عليكم.